Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Hello. Apologies if there was a delay for you. Welcome. Thank you for bearing with me as I iron out these kinks. This is my first time hosting a live, so I'm very grateful for your patience. I promise there's going to be a lot in here, a lot that's new, hopefully, to the majority of us, even though I wish it was common knowledge. But that is the point of this particular class. Here at Your Inner Power, I want to bring the strengths and inherent tricks and tools that the body has for us, and to make them more commonplace and make them more simple and accessible for the vast majority of people. One of the major ones that I strongly hold dear to my heart is the breath. And that is because the breath changed my life quite a lot. The breath is an amazing, amazing tool, and it is at the same time a very basic function of the human body, which we don't think about. So in this class, I am going to go into the tools and the benefits of breathing properly, how to use your breath for better health, longevity, mental clarity, and an overall quality of life that is improved. Because this life, in essence, we all want to advance ourselves. We want to move on from where we began to somewhere that is elevated. We want to create something from this life that is more than what we started out with. And the beautiful thing with that is that we all understand that it begins in a, well, I won't say everybody understands, but there is one root principle of transforming our lives, and that is it begins with the mind. The mind is an incredibly complex system, and it functions in a lot of ways that are mysterious, but the mind in many ways dictates our actions, our behavior, but we can use our mind to affect our outcomes. And one of the ways that the brain functions is through hormones. Now, I'm going to quickly check that this stream is live because this is the first time I'm doing this. So bear with me. I do hope that the email went out. Mm. Okay, okay, okay. Let me try this again. One moment, please. I'm navigating with the other side to see that maybe there's an issue. Okay. Seems like we're having an issue. Okay. All right, we're gonna just keep going. Okay, we'll restart this whole thing, and we'll get rolling right away. Please hold. Okay, thank you everybody for your patience. I am learning a lot. So, this is a course on breath health. And you are all my friends and family, so this is partly why I'm doing this for free because I didn't know how this was going to work. And this is all just to get my legs under me in this sort of online sphere to learn how this all works. So thank you for your patience. Now, in this crazy day and age where we all work in such a high capacity, at such a high frequency, we're all trying our best to manage our mental health and our sanity, frankly. We're all trying to bring ourselves back to something that is richer, an experience that is better than what we started with. So we're all trying to actualize, we're trying to elevate ourselves. And we know that one of the best ways to do that is with the mind. What we're going to go into in this course is to see how the breath affects the mind, how we can use the breath for better mental health, better clarity, better digestion, even, but overall, greater state of well being, including agency over our own lives, which has been measured to be a great marker for an increased sense of confidence, clarity in life, and general wellness. It begins with the mind. Now, the mind is a complex structure. We're aware that it affects a lot of our behaviors and a lot of the actions we take. And we know how we can use it to affect outcomes. And we're familiar that it functions in many ways with the process of hormones. Hormones being these chemical messengers that are sent throughout the body to different organs, cells, turning things on, turning things off. And the mind communicates with these, but what we don't recognize is that we actually have some influence on this hormone production. The endocrine system itself is not actually autonomic as we thought it was. This autonomic process, thought to be automatic, is actually influenced by us, influenced by endogenous processes, primarily which we're going to focus on being the breath. The hormones which affect the mind are actually affected by the breath. Now, how? We're going to get into that in this little class here. The fact is, they are interconnected, the mind and the lungs. The mind receives messages based on the functioning of the lungs. And of course, the lungs are part of that autonomic system, which is automatic. But it's one of the few processes, if not the only process as we know of now, that can be influenced directly. All of the other processes, the hormonal processes which I mentioned, the glandular system, the endocrine system, they're all indirectly affected. The fact is, the breath itself affects everything, including the way we think. It's been used for a long time as a point of focus, as a point of growth, enlightenment, advancement. Everybody, as you can see from the Olmecs in that top left photo, you can see that individual is not dancing or conversing, he's what looks like meditating. He might be chanting, but that ancient stone sculpture indicates that there is, much like all these stone sculptures, an awareness that presence and balance in some way takes a shape, takes a physical shape. What's interesting about these photos of the Egyptian, the wall carvings, is that the noses have been knocked off. This is thought to have been people trying to hide the secrets, or or in some way reveal the secrets. Perhaps we don't know. We weren't there. I certainly wasn't. That were hidden by the temples as to something very particular. Now, of course, the nose is used for smell, which is important in some respect for survival, but the breath much more so. And the breath is one of the only two functions the nose serves by. So this leads us to believe, of course, by inference, that the nose in some way was important. And that is something we're going to touch on. But if all of these ancient societies, religions, spiritual practices had found value in the breath, would it not be prudent to recognize that it holds some value to us? Now, oftentimes, this point of access is found in a yoga studio or simply in anger management, and it's used by people to find a sense of peace and a sense of calm. But if it's so powerful, wouldn't it not make sense to apply it into our daily lives and to use it without having to go to such extremes, but just learning how to use it to benefit us if it is such a foundational, structural component of our well-being and our existence? I would say yes. And that is why you're all here, because I find it so valuable that this information needs to be talked about. This science is fairly new and is not quite getting the traction that I believe it deserves. It's in the books, it's in the scientific papers, as we're going to get into in this course. In essence, I find it so important to talk about this because of the huge impacts, and you'll see why in a little bit. So, breath is the simplest, most accessible, most far-reaching function of the body that can affect our well-being, our mental health, our athletic performance, our longevity. It's simple, clear, and accessible. Well-being, stress, and anxiety management, all of these things can be affected by the breath. It can even transform digestion and affect blood acidity. It's used for athletic performance, but why can't it be used by the modern individual to improve their lives? So, like I said, it affects everything. Every process is touched by the breath, whether it's mental clarity, digestion, performance, blood acidity, cardiovascular health, fatigue, stress and anxiety management, blood pressure, sleep, nervous system activation, and immune function. The list is longer than this, but if you look at this, you can see that these are not small things that have been shown to be affected by the breath. These are not small trifles. These are not things that just stay with you for a little while. These are foundational effects or problems or challenges in our modern day life. The medical system is weighed down by a lot of these. And though when we look at a problem that somebody has, we don't often, we found that the medical system sometimes lacks the ability to look at something and say, this is exactly the reason why. The reason I want to address the breath is because if we address that foundational, that deepest part of ourselves, that deepest connection to life that we have, the breath, we know that at least we've begun at the source. And from there, we can access so much more, and we negate the lowest thing as being the source of the problem that we could. It's important to address the state address our breath health, not only for the sake of our physical and mental health, but also our well-being and our quality of life. It's with you all the time. And so when it collides all of these impactful elements of the human existence, of the human experience, these health elements, these physiological elements, blood pressure, acidity, all of that, breath becomes the most powerful and simple way to affect the direction our lives are going, influence them for the better, be more effective and present, and improve the direction of our lives, whatever stage we are at. So, for a moment, just right now, take a big deep breath. Take a big deep breath as far as you can go and hold it in. Feel that tension building in your head. Feel that tingling sensation. Take another little sip. And now exhale. All of that physiological sensation that you feel is an element of the body and the mind being affected by the breath. So this has been something that has been reserved for the fitness class, the yoga mat. But as you can see right there, you can affect your state of being immediately. Most of us many of us, I won't say most of us, it says many of us in my notes, are uninspired. We're tired, anxious, we're running from place to place, achieving things that we are afraid to look further down the road for. We're doing things that we're not quite certain how they're going to go. And in this life, we want to squeeze it for all that it's worth. But we want to squeeze more wellness out of it too. We want to see how much better our lives can be in all moments. And that is possible more and more if we address the foundational element of our lives. If we at least take care of that, so many more things go smoothly. We do a lot to change in our lives, but one thing that's funny is how you'll see a lot of our efforts are undermined by the way we breathe. That's why I call it breath health, is because it's not simply breath work or pranayama as people have come to expect it to be addressed in the modern day life. It is the state of health of our breath, which stays with us all the time, that's important. Because if we're trying to address our mental health, for example, a lot of our efforts will be undermined by this low level of chronic stress that we are experiencing just by breathing poorly. And it's not immediately apparent, but there's a lot of scientific papers that are starting to come to terms with the fact that breath is actually very important to look at and has a lot of effects on our physiology. It's a superpower within us all. Because it is so far reaching and also simple and also accessible. It becomes capable for us to take agency over our own mind, our own body, and of our own well-being. We're going to go into how the breath affects your nervous system, how it's potentially harming our health all day in this first class. So by breathing properly, by breathing improperly or incorrectly, your body essentially stays in a diminished state of effectiveness and health because it communicates with and it dictates the level and state of the nervous system, your root messaging system, which sends messages to the endocrine glands, to the digestive system. It sends messages to send off certain hormones, and they all interact in this complex web. But the breath involved in that nervous system affects every other system. The secret to breath is we can use it to change our lives in a way that we never thought we could before. Because the body is not autonomic anymore.
body and mind are now found to be much more plastic. Of course, we've heard the term neuroplasticity, and that's not all. It's not just the mind that's plastic. It's also the nerves. Sorry, not the nerves, but the hormones, in the sense that we can control them. This is Wim Hof. You see him floating around in an ice pond or lake, and he is known by many to be the Iceman because he has set world records, upwards of 19 world records, where he has run up of Everest in shorts. He has run in the Arctic. He has run in the Sahara without water. He has swam for 9 minutes holding his breath under the sea ice, as well as many other feats, and he attributes many of these to his control and manipulation of his own breath and his mind together in tandem. As a team, those two elements of him have led him to set all of these world records and transform the way the medical books are written. He was my first introduction to breath and its immense power. One of the main things that he was really strict on was that he could teach other people to use their breaths in the same way. He was injected with a neurotoxin that would normally cause somebody intense heat fluctuations in their temperature, intense reactions such as vomiting, sweating, illness, and he fought it off just using his breath practice, his breath patterns rather, and he taught this to other people, and they were also able to fight off the toxin in their system, actively taking some agency in this. This goes to show we're not just set. We're not autonomic. We are much more plastic, much more pliable, and much more in control of our own lives. You could say we have some sort of inner power. So, our mind will listen to our breath, regardless of what scenario we're in. It has the effect on changing our nervous system and our sensations, like you experienced. But it doesn't have a choice. Really, the mind relies on certain systems to communicate. It sees things and it processes things, but it gets messages elsewhere. The temperature, different sensations in our body, our physical sensations, but also in the way we're breathing. And we're often reactively breathing. But by effectively changing the breath, consciously breathing, having some agency in it, controlling it, which is what pranayama means, we get the benefit of affecting the way that our mind is functioning. So if you say to somebody, take a deep breath, in a way that's not entirely so simple. In a way it's actually wrong. But we'll get to that in a bit. In short, a big breath ignites us even further and turns on our nervous system even more. But it does go to show that we are conscious of the fact that we can affect the state of being with the breath. So my goal here is to encourage you to think a little more consciously about how you breathe all day and every day, and to see how you might be affecting your body and your mind by breathing. Because agency in your breath is agency in your life. There was a scientific paper that did studies between people who were not mindful of their breath, people who were simply aware of their breath, and people who practiced a specific breath pattern. And they found that people which practiced a specific breath pattern, they had a lot less anxiety, they had a lot less tension, a lot less apprehension, and a lot more confidence to achieve things. So in this class, we'll go through what this means, what a healthy breath really is, what it isn't, and we'll give you some simple techniques to be in control of your own state of being. So for me, breath. Why do I think it's so valuable? Well, I used to be very anxious. I used to be completely, I would say, erratic, high energy, very, very, I guess you could say, airy fairy. And I wasn't really that grounded in life. I didn't really have a direction. Wherever I went, I liked being social, but I was very poor at it. I was very good at being bouncing around the party, for example, not being able to. I would leave events and thing experiences with people evenings without even remembering what I had talked about because I was so not present. And so breath allowed me that ability to bring myself back to where I was, bring myself back to the center, and navigate life from where I was rather than where I was afraid to be or whether the things that I expected might happen were going to happen. I was a lot more present, a lot more capable because I felt like I was a lot more in control of my mind and myself. And to me, it's also exciting to be going through life, having things happen to me, and be able to simply breathe in a different way, and then have some agency over that. It's like a little game for me. It's like this. I'm winning these small battles that might be inconsequential, but it's still I feel more in control. And I think that's a vital tool to pass on to everybody to have a little greater recognition of this. So it gave me clarity of mind as well as something deeper. It was something that I could connect to that was always there, that took me out of these issues that I was experiencing in my life, whether it was roommate problems or work problems or relationship problems. There was still this underlying sense that that's not all. And so though times would get tough, I could always come back to that and recognize that there's something greater going on. I have this breath that runs through me, and I have some agency over it. I'm not totally lost. So improper breath is a long list of it provides us with a long list of problems. This is just a short list that I put together of studies. And we can see they're not just trifles. Increased risk of asthma and spasms in the lungs. Reduced exercise tolerance. Sleep disturbances. Anxiety and panic attacks. Digestive issues. Cardiovascular problems. Headaches and migraines. Fatigue and lethargy. Reduced immune function. Hormonal imbalances. Musculoskeletal pain. Poor concentration and memory, and even fibromyalgia. This is all being now recognized as being affected by the breath. What's amazing is, again, you have this within you to change and to control and to affect. So we're not, in a sense, going into life worrying about these issues. We're doing what we can to mitigate them and to do the best that we can to affect our lives healthy in a healthy way. So this is some indication that the medical system, if they are paying attention to it, it must mean that we are getting to a good point of understanding our physiology, and it's hopeful. It's hope inducing for me because it means that we are going to be more aware of our own inner power. So the best way to do the best way to solve any problem is to begin at the source, and the best way to do that is to begin at the breath because the breath is our source. It's so O2 and CO2, oxygen and carbon dioxide. They are what we primarily think of when we think of the breath. We are affected so much by the breath because we deliver oxygen to most of the cells in the body, and we extract CO2 from every living cell because it's a process of being alive that waste products are created and they need to be offloaded. If they're not carried away, then problems happen. And if they're not replaced, and if they're not fed, these cells aren't fed, that's also a problem. Just by that logic alone, we can see how valuable the breath is. We're incredibly complex physiologically. And if we know that we're working from this good foundation by breathing healthy, we know that we're not undermined at the very source of our energy and our life force. We are doing the bare minimum at least. If we're not doing even the bare minimum properly, we can expect a lot of things to go wrong. If we're breathing out of sync of natural, healthy patterns, there are so many knock-on effects. Since this process right here, that oxygen infusion and carbon dioxide extraction, is happening all day, every day. It's happening in almost every cell. These can be minor stresses for sure. If one cell has to wait a little bit in a anabolic state without oxygen or without offloading carbon dioxide, for example, that's okay. But over a prolonged period of time, by not operating in sync with the natural order of how we function, it can become a problem. These negative effects can be very detrimental to our health over time, and it can compound into disease or illness. So the modern individual breathes on average 20,000 times per day. If each breath is either too short or it's taken in through the mouth, forgive my dog, or if it's not deep enough, or it takes in too much air, that person is in essence doing a little bit of harm to themselves 20,000 times per day. This leads to chronic stress. This leads to tension, blood acidity imbalance, excess adrenaline in the system, high blood pressure, lack of the state of restoration, all throughout the day simply by breathing incorrectly. And like I said, either too much breath, too short breath, or if it's taken in through the mouth. These are happening. If you're looking at it this way, and somebody is actively doing these things 20,000 times per day, having these effects rather 20,000 times per day, if they knew that they were doing that, it would almost be as if they were trying to hurt themselves. But of course, we're not trying to hurt ourselves. Breathing incorrectly is simply something we've not been taught about, or something that simply runs away from us, and we aren't able to recognize that we're doing it because we simply don't think about it. Okay. So what could we do differently? What could we do differently to affect our lives by utilizing this magnificently powerful tool that we have at our disposal? Well, in this course, we're not going to go into the basics of breath. We're going to go a little deeper than just the way it works, beyond just extracting oxygen and filtering carbon dioxide. We're going to go just a little deeper and give you some practical things to take away. The most fundamental element, I believe, in the human being is these two sides of us: the fight and flight and the rest and digest modes of the nervous system. Which, the fight and flight, you can call it the sympathetic nervous system, and the rest and digest, the parasympathetic side of the nervous system. So in this day and age, one is predominant. We are often working against ourselves, rushing, pressuring ourselves to do more, and we don't give ourselves a lot of time to rest and digest. That makes this right brain, right side of it's not a side of the nervous system, but that parasympathetic state of the nervous system becomes much more valuable to us because it is much more needed in this high-strung, high-stress, high-paced day and age where so much is going on, and we feel like we have to keep up and do all of these things to be a functioning modern individual. But by entering into that rest and digest state throughout the day, we function better and we can live in a more human way, I would say. So this sympathetic state isn't that necessary. Chances are, if you're watching this, you're safe at home, you have a roof over your head, you have eaten in the past few days, and you're not under immediate threat, which means this system, which is very taxing on the body, doesn't need to be engaged. But as we'll see, this breathing pattern that is incorrect, or if we're not breathing more in a healthy way, we're activating this stressed side of the nervous system throughout the day, meaning we are overactivated than we need to be, which is not good. It's not healthy. It causes us to age prematurely, and causes the breakdown of our cells and our processes a lot quicker than they should be. It wears down our systems. When we're not staying in that sympathetic system, when we're not staying in that sympathetic nervous system activation, we're able to rest and digest. We're able to process things more clearly and live more healthily for ourselves. So, the nose is the first one. It's the first element and that we need to address when we talk about breath health. Look at it. Look at it. It's beautiful. It has so many little passageways, so many little, they're called turbinates, that spin and warm the air. They speed up the molecules. They make it easier to be absorbed and saturated into the blood. Of course, it's specialized to breathe, but it also lowers the blood pressure. That's what's really interesting. Over 10 days, blood pressure dropped from 142 to 124 in a certain study. But what it also does is it releases nitric oxide, which is important for all these here: immune function, weight, circulation, mood, and sexual function. All of these, we could say, are desirable to be functioning properly. Nitric oxide being released through nose breathing. So that's right there a fundamental element of how valuable it is to breathe properly and not be idle with it. Because I'll be honest, I don't know exactly how much more that's in my notes now to learn more about nitric oxide and where else it's produced. Because, well, regardless, this is a simple way to make sure that you're doing something to affect it and produce it properly, release it. The opposite, mouth breathing. Not the best for us. Quickly, this photo here is quite shocking. There's more than these, more than just these two examples, but I couldn't confirm that they were actually from a mouth breathing study. But it has been shown to change the shape of the face. So you can see that his mouth obviously is more open in the left side, even though it's open in the right. But look at his jawline. Look at the shape of the chin. Look at his, what was it? The ear seems to be a little drooped. When we mouth breathe, we are doing a lot of harm to ourselves, actually. Heart rate variability actually plummets. Blood pressure rises. The pulse increases, our temperature cools, our brains can be foggy. It can exacerbate sleep apnea, which I'll get into in a moment. But it often offloads too much CO2, carbon dioxide, which we're going to get into in a big way here, because it's very important for us to keep that balance appropriate. Oxygen and carbon dioxide, excuse me. And it also reduces oxygen saturation, which is a big no-no. Because then the blood can't carry enough oxygen to the tissues, and a chronic condition of this can lead to heart failure, depression, memory problems, and even an early death. But breathing from the mouth also suppresses vasopressin, which is a very interesting hormone which causes the kidneys to hold on to water, and so to store water. And so if you have sleep apnea, for example, but even if you don't, If you're waking up in the middle of the night because you have to go to the bathroom, it's likely because your mouth was open. You can tell because your mouth will be dry, which means that your the vasopressin was suppressed. So that molecule which kept you holding on to that fluid until you were ready to wake up, that wasn't being released. So you were okay, your body was okay letting go of that fluid, and now you have to go to the bathroom. This disruption of sleep is not optimal, of course. We all love a good night's sleep. So one thing I do is I use mouth tape, just a simple strip of 3M tape, because my mouth was hanging open at a certain point. Now it's a lot better for that, but I was waking up in the middle of the night and I was going to the bathroom and I couldn't understand why. Why do I keep waking up in the middle of the night? And then I found that when I was taping my mouth shut in the middle of the night, it was a lot simpler. Or I was sleeping a lot more deeper, and everything was a lot better. In a very scientific way to put it. So one big effect that mouth breathing has is on children. Because you have to breathe more when you breathe through your mouth, because you offload too much carbon dioxide, which is important to that balance. In children, it affects a lot. In a developing human, blood pressure disorders, learning disabilities are affected. And a Japanese study showed that mouth breathing disturbs oxygen to the prefrontal cortex, which is very important in the developing mind when we're trying to make active decisions and have some agency in our thoughts. And it was associated with ADHD development. It caused a percentage drop in IQ points. Even sleep disorders in children were caused. And this is not something we want our future generations to be growing up with. We want them to have as healthy of a life as we can, but it would be as simple in this respect to begin with closing the mouth. And in adults, sleep apnea was a big issue as well. And it's tied in a lot of ways to overbreathing. So, this is our next point of address, which is the pace of breathing. And we call this resonant breathing in the Pluminaut community. It is, if it's a community, but it is essentially maintaining the proper frequency of breath, the proper volume, the proper amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide in your system. So essentially, slow, adequate breath is important for us, because overbreathing is a huge issue. It does something very counterintuitive. It removes too much carbon dioxide from the bloodstream. Now, we think of carbon dioxide as this waste gas, but it's actually fundamental to oxygen absorption. If you offload too much carbon dioxide from your system, there's not enough of it in your system to trigger the release of oxygen. So if you inhale and you don't have enough carbon dioxide to switch in your lungs for oxygen, you don't have enough CO2 to swap it for oxygen, then that oxygen just gets breathed right out. It feels like it's not needed because it can't make the switch with the CO2. And so we actually aren't able to saturate our blood enough. That's because that switch only happens, the oxygen only comes into us when there's CO2 to come out of us. That happens at the cellular level, which is at the cells that need oxygen, but also in the lungs. So if you don't have enough CO2 in your system, you won't actually release that oxygen from the air into your system, because that switch needs to happen. So one thing that is funny that happens, it's not funny, it's tragic, is that the body then will recognize it's not getting enough oxygen and will trigger us to breathe even more to get the oxygen we need. And then that problem isn't being solved at all. It's a band-aid solution. We're breathing out too much, whether it's too fast, too often, or if it's just too much volume of air. So it's not just a waste gas. It's important for the release of oxygen. So just a few more reasons to breathe properly. It leads us to greater aerobic endurance. It increases our VO2 max, which is the maximum amount of oxygen that can be saturated in the blood, and increases our respiratory fitness. But breathing improperly, it likely means you're breathing too fast, which actually mimics the state of a distressed creature. Our body often registers this as a problem because if we're breathing too fast, we're mimicking that gazelle that is running in the jungle, or ourselves if we were running from a predator or an enemy of some kind. That's the state that needs adrenaline, that's when we need that adrenaline and that cortisol to get us into motion, to keep us moving, to keep us alive. But that is a very taxing state. It's a very taxing state to be functioning in. And simply by breathing a little too much, that state is initiated. So what's funny is you don't even actually have to breathe a lot to maintain proper oxygen saturation levels. But it is important you don't exhale too much. But breathing too much is often just a product of bad habits, simply something that we're not aware of, something that got carried away. Overbreathing can fog the mind and make us more prone to making poor decisions, and which then leads us to more stress. So on a spiritual level, it's not good for us. So rushing is something I see a lot of us doing, myself included. I was a big rusher. And I still can find myself doing it nowadays. But when I apply this remembrance that we don't really gain much by rushing, and in fact we do ourselves a lot more harm, making whatever it is that we're doing more of a problem, then it's helped me really bring myself back to remembering to breathe slower and to just be slower. We breathe too much, we dump too much of that oxygen, or that CO2, which is necessary for the oxygen. This decreases our ability to be mindful, which then we rush even more because our brain is foggy. And so we can't be present. Our brain is foggy, so we're not present, and then we get more foggy. And then we make mistakes, and we get stressed, and we breathe fast, and our body thinks we're even more stressed, then we can't sleep at night because our whole system has been taxed all day, and we haven't given ourselves that off switch. So the body often just stays in that state, and we stay in a chronic state of stress even throughout the night, meaning we don't actually get a restful sleep. So, in addition to that, it's just more strain on the body to breathe a lot. We just, it's a taxing process, whatever we're doing. It taxes the body in some way. And if we're breathing too much, that's just excess energy to make that transition from oxygen to carbon dioxide. But then, if we are strained and stressed, we're often not making decisions from that rest and digest creative side of the mind. We're often making those decisions from that fight and flight side of the mind that is focused on short-term survival rather than thriving and being creative and making good decisions. So the solution is obviously to breathe slower, obviously, if we're breathing too fast. The body will then breathe less, and it will bring balance to your blood saturation levels. It gradually changes up the makeup of the hormones to be less in that survival state. You're making better decisions and more capable of making those desires, those dreams happen for ourselves, rather than rushing about losing our minds. Some CO2 needs to be retained in your body, and if you breathe slower, you're likely to offload a lot less of it. So, this is Sanya Richards-Ross, and she's a gold medalist. And if you look at her running with these two other women, you can look at their faces that, I mean, there's two of them that are clearly struggling. But the gold medalist on the right has a calm, placid look on her face. She is breathing through her nose. She is actually running an Olympic race by breathing through her nose. This is something we've been conditioned to see a lot in sports. A lot of athletes don't actually address the way that they breathe. We just think that because the mouth is bigger, we can take in more air. And of course, there are times when that's important. That's just the way it's going to be. But our limits are quite far. If we train properly to breathe with the nose, it's a lot more efficient. And she's accomplishing a lot more for a lot less. Her muscle endurance is higher simply because that stress level has those knock-on effects and it's not affecting her negatively. Breathing through the nose, breathing slower, encourages the parasympathetic state. Well, in this case, breathing slower specifically encourages that state. And it harmonizes all the systems of your body, all the physiological systems, digestion, immune function, all of that. It leads us to a clear mind and allows us to better navigate our own lives, make better choices. So again, resonant breathing, breathing too much or too fast dumps too much CO2. And one thing that's amazing is that you get better blood flow as well as better oxygen flow because CO2 actually dilates the cells of the airways and the blood vessels. You can think of that transfer happening. But if you have too little CO2 in your system, your blood cells tighten. You decrease blood flow by about 4 times. I should say you increase blood flow by 4 times by having proper CO2 retained in the system. And that's all I have to say about that. So the easiest thing you can do is just breathe slower. And the pace that has been found to be most effective is just this: 5.5 seconds on the inhale, 5.5 seconds on the exhale. Now, don't think that you're going to be unhealthy if you don't breathe this at this pace. Even a slight improvement over the pace that you're breathing now has been shown to give marked benefits and improvements in your own well-being. So just try breathing slower, specifically with your exhales. What's funny is you don't want to have short exhales. Like, you don't want to exhale less. You want your cycles to be less. You want the frequency to be less. What's funny is that by decreasing the length of the inhales and increasing the length of the exhales, the efficiency of that transfer is almost as important, if not as important, as how much you breathe. Because so you'll be able to inhale a little bit, but that all if not most, if not all of that oxygen will be absorbed into your system because you still have a lot of carbon dioxide. You're breathing out slowly that carbon dioxide, which means you're not actually offloading it many times a minute. The next thing we could do is breathe from the diaphragm. Look at this thing. This thing is beautiful, I think. I don't think many of us appreciate how big and weird our diaphragm is, but that big old umbrella, that big old elephant eyelid is the diaphragm. On the right there, you can see it clearly that it's a big old muscle. It's attached to those ribs, and you can feel it maybe moving right now. You don't, what you probably aren't taught as a kid is that your heart is attached to your diaphragm. Well, the pericardium is, which is the sheath around the heart. But look how close they are related. Think about if you are not breathing from the diaphragm, you're keeping that diaphragm up. And that reduces the space the heart has to move, which means the heart is actually having to work harder to beat, to deliver blood to your system. It's all very efficiently packed into there. You don't have much wasted space in the body. And so if you're not letting that diaphragm drop down, this is often why not breathing from the diaphragm can lead to cardiac issues, cardiovascular issues. The blood pressure actually stays high if we don't breathe low. If you think about it this way, when you breathe low, you are expanding the space and the heart can beat easier, meaning your blood pressure can lower because the blood pressure essentially is lower, so the heart can beat a little faster on the inhale, because it's more free. Which is why when you take a big inhale, you feel more activated. Your pulse actually rises. And if you exhale and you keep that exhale suspended, you can actually lower your heart rate. This is heart rate variability, a marker of health that doctors have used for a long time. Your diaphragm is often called your second heart because it assists in the beating of the heart in that way. It lowers and raises the blood pressure in that cavity specifically, sending the messages to the brain to either beat faster or slower. And by breathing from the diaphragm, you reduce your sympathetic activation, which is that fight and flight system. So, so imagine if you're breathing over the course of your life through the chest, you're not only putting excess strain on the heart, but you're also doing something else, which is you are communicating with the nerves that are up high in the chest. I don't remember what they're called, but they are responsible for connecting you to that fight and flight. The nerves that are responsible more for your rest and digest mode are actually in your belly. But not only that, but if you think about it, what's lower than your diaphragm is all of the processing and the digestion of your body. If you are breathing through the diaphragm, it's almost like you're massaging that area, which is, of course, not necessarily what a doctor would say, but it is, I would say, healthier to give your belly a massage. In essence, it's not being stressed all the time. By breathing with the diaphragm, it's like you are moving all of that around, which is good. Movement is great. So, if you find yourself worrying a lot about the future, if you're anxious, you're overly tense, you're unable to make good decisions, you might just be exacerbating it by being in a low-level state of fight and flight, which is all of these little elements working together. This mouth breathing too quickly, breathing up high in the chest. These are all elements that can exacerbate and ignite that adrenalized state, which we don't need to be operating in for very long at all. It's a very effective and process because it is so energy intensive. You help ease the tension in your body when you breathe healthy because you're not telling yourself again that you're in that chronic fight or flight state. So, just like I said, you mitigate the low level of fight and flight. That's essentially what it is. I'm sorry, I must have gone through this slide in my notes already. But yeah, with thinking outside the box, it literally means that you're just thinking more creatively. Because you're not in that survival state. You're not thinking constantly that there's a danger. But it's not even an active thought. It could be simply a subconscious messaging or the way that your mind is viewing it. And I'm not saying, of course, that this is going to be solved by breathing deeply, but you mitigate that. You take the breath out of the equation, and you make it a lot easier to take control of these thoughts by not acting against yourself at the very root of who you are, of all of your physical processes. So by breathing properly, you can actually use more of yourself. By breathing deeper and slower through the nose, you get to ease your physiological systems. You ease the tension on your heart. You ease the tension on your immune system. You ease the tension of stress that is involved with releasing all of these energizing, electrifying adrenal cortisol hormones, the adrenal hormones. The mind registers then that you're safe, you're capable, you've got this. It's actually not all that bad. And then it ignites that parasympathetic state, that rest and digest state, which means you sleep better. It means you have better circulation, you think more creatively, and you are more grounded and present. All of these are knock-on effects of being in a more rested and digested state of being. You can make better choices, and then you can have a better life. So the breath is a natural process. In short, and to close this all off, it is the base of who you are. And it functions in a particular way. If we want to be more effective in life, I always think we want to do things as naturally as we can, make them as uncomplicated and as natural and as easy, as effective as they can be by just letting them be as they want to be. Breath is one of those. When you breathe more healthy, more slowly, you're able to activate that side of you that is more, everything is working as it's designed to be, including you, including your thoughts. You're not fighting against yourself. You're not fighting against these thoughts of anger, anxiety, and tension that you might be being influenced by just by the undercurrent, the subconscious undercurrent of panic, stress, and adrenaline that is being activated by this state of fight and flight. Your body registers the way you breathe, and if you're breathing normally, you're literally telling your body everything's okay. I've got this. I'm in control. I'm powerful enough to handle this. In a way, of course, I'm not saying that breath is the answer to everything, and that is partly why I think this hasn't taken the world by storm, because it's not romantic, it's not sexy, it's not immediate, but it is in a way. Breath health isn't immediate. The reason breath work has been taking the world by storm, unsurprisingly, in this overworked culture, something that is involving working our most fundamental process, that's popular because it's fast and it gives us something shocking. But if we just go back after those experiences to this state of low level stress, we're doing so much unnecessary work and it's so much harder to function properly as a person. So we're going to take away something from this. If you haven't already, I want you to simply take a moment and we're going to initiate just a little bit of breath awareness. We're not going to go into too much practice here. We're already at an hour. I'm sorry. But I just want you to do this a few times a day. Once a day, just try once a day. Aim for once a day. And if you can, great. If you do it more, even better. Put your hand on your belly right now. Close your eyes if you want to. And just see what that breath is. Is there movement there? Is there nothing there? Is there no movement at all? Acknowledge that these muscles can contribute to your increased blood flow. It can contribute to a better state of mind. It can contribute better mental clarity. You're going to do what you can to mitigate all of that long list of problems caused by improper breathing. Once a day, try to lengthen your exhales. Ask yourself, what would it be like? What is it like to breathe slower? It might be hard at first, of course. And in future classes, we're going to go into strengthening these muscles. Lengthening this, making this parasympathetic rhythm of breath more accessible, more normal for us. Because a lot of us have just become habituated to breathe in a way that's not healthy, and it's not our fault. So, I thank you very much for joining me in this. I really do wish you the best. I hope you do take something away from this. If at all, just a little bit of awareness that you have more agency over your own state of being, your mental health, your longevity, all of that is more within your power than you've been told to before. And I hope you capitalize on it and run with it even just a little bit. To breathe a little slower, breathe with your belly, and acknowledge that you are more than you've been told before. Thank you so much for being here. This was a lot. I hope it was not too much for you. Take it forward. I send you off with all of my best intentions, and I wish you so much health, longevity, happiness. Of course, if you're here, I will see you again. So please tell me what you thought of this, because this was exciting for me to put together, and I do think this is important stuff to talk about. So it won't be the last, but it is the first. So thank you so much. Breathe.